I'm Eleanor Wilson, 68 years old, and I never thought I'd have to use my legal expertise against my own son. The colonial house I've lived in for 40 years became a battleground when Richard moved back after his divorce. When I returned from visiting my sister, my key wouldn't work. Richard had changed the locks while I was gone. Little did he know, I didn't spend 40 years as one of Boston's top real estate attorneys to be outsmarted by my own flesh and blood. If you're watching this video, drop a comment letting me know where you're from, and hit that subscribe button to hear how I reclaimed what was rightfully mine. Raising Richard alone wasn't what I had planned. When my husband Thomas died from a sudden heart attack 27 years ago, I was left with an 8-year-old boy and a mortgage I could barely afford on my junior attorney's salary. But I'm not one to crumble under pressure. If anything, becoming a widow made me more determined to succeed. "You'll never make partner," my male colleagues would say, not always behind my back. "This isn't a job for a single mother." Those were different times when women in law offices were expected to be secretaries, not attorneys arguing cases. But I worked twice as hard as any man there, bringing case files home every night after putting Richard to bed. The colonial house on Maple Street had been in my family for generations. My parents left it to me, their only child. Its blue shutters and wraparound porch had weathered many storms, just like I had. Every crack in the hardwood floors told a story. Richard's first steps, the Christmas when he knocked over the tree chasing our cat Mittens, the graduation party I threw him when he finished college against all odds. Against all odds, that phrase became a pattern with Richard. He always seemed to be swimming upstream, partly due to circumstances and partly due to his own choices. He married too young, I thought, to his college sweetheart Amanda. She was a sweet girl, but neither of them was ready for the commitment. I tried to advise caution, but Richard always had to learn things the hard way. Their marriage lasted 12 years, ending when Amanda discovered Richard's gambling habit had emptied their savings account. I wasn't entirely surprised. Richard had always sought quick fixes and easy money. Even as a teenager, he'd been caught running a questionable betting pool at his high school. I'd hoped he'd outgrow it, but some patterns run deep. The divorce hit him hard financially. Amanda's lawyer was thorough, making sure she was protected from Richard's debts. He lost their condo in the settlement and was drowning in gambling debts I hadn't known existed. "Mom, I just need a place to stay for a few months," he pleaded over the phone. "Just until I get back on my feet." At 67, I was enjoying my retirement. After 4 decades of navigating property law, I had settled into a peaceful routine of gardening, book club meetings with my friends Barbara and Grace, and occasional consulting work when former clients specifically requested me. The thought of disrupting that peace gave me pause, but he was my son. What was I supposed to do? 3 months, I told him firmly. "You can stay for 3 months while you figure things out." He arrived with more luggage than someone planning a temporary stay should have. I noticed it but didn't say anything. That was my first mistake. Initially, things were harmonious. Richard helped with dishes, fixed the leaky faucet in the downstairs bathroom, and even joined me for my evening walks around the neighborhood. We hadn't spent this much time together since he was a teenager, and I treasured these reconnections despite the circumstances. But by month 2, the cracks began to show. Richard was sleeping until noon, leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor, and forgetting to pay the portion of utilities we'd agreed upon. He'd always had a charm about him that helped him slide by in life, and he was using it liberally now. "Mom, you don't understand how hard it is out there right now," he'd say whenever I brought up job hunting. "The economy's terrible for someone my age." Richard was 35, hardly at a disadvantage in the job market, especially with his business degree. But I bit my tongue, not wanting to add pressure to his already difficult situation. Then his friends started visiting. Men I didn't know would show up at odd hours, disappearing into the basement with Richard, where I could hear the telltale sounds of poker chips and hushed conversations about odds and betting lines. Empty beer bottles would appear in my recycling bin, and occasionally I'd smell cigarette smoke wafting from the backyard, though Richard knew I had asthma. By month 4, well past our agreed timeline, I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable in my own home. Richard had taken over the living room with his giant television and gaming equipment. The kitchen counters were perpetually sticky from his late-night snacking. And most concerning, I'd noticed cash missing from my desk drawer twice, though Richard vehemently denied any knowledge of it. My friend Barbara noticed the strain during our weekly lunch. "Eleanor, you look exhausted," she said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "Is everything all right with Richard living there?" I sighed, stirring my tea absently. "It's not what I expected. He's not really looking for work, and I'm starting to feel like a guest in my own home." "You need some space," Barbara insisted. "Come with me to visit Marilyn in Maine this weekend. Her lake house is gorgeous this time of year, and the fresh air will do you good." Marilyn was my younger sister, who had retired to a beautiful property in rural Maine. The thought of escaping for a few days was tempting. "I don't know," I hesitated. "Richard might." "Richard is a grown man who can fend for himself for a weekend," Barbara interrupted firmly. "You've earned a break." She was right. I called Richard that evening to inform him of my plans. "That's great, Mom," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "You deserve some time away. Don't worry about anything here. I'll take care of the house." His enthusiasm should have been a warning sign, but I was too relieved by his positive reaction to question it. I packed my bags with a lightness I hadn't felt in months, looking forward to lakeside conversations with my sister and freedom from the walking on eggshells feeling that had overtaken my home. "I'll be back Sunday evening," I told Richard as I hugged him goodbye. "Please remember to water my orchids in the sunroom." "Of course," he smiled. "Have a great time, Mom. Don't rush back." I certainly didn't expect those casual words to be the prelude to the most shocking betrayal of my life. The drive back from Maine had been peaceful. The weekend with Marilyn and Barbara had been exactly what I needed: fresh air, laughter, and not a single dirty dish to wash. We'd spent hours on Marilyn's deck overlooking the lake, catching up on each other's lives and reminiscing about our childhood. For the first time in months, my shoulders weren't tight with tension. I pulled into my driveway around 7 in the evening, noting that Richard's car was gone. Probably out with friends, I thought. It would be nice to have the house to myself for a few more hours. I gathered my overnight bag from the trunk and walked up the familiar path to my front door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across my carefully tended garden, and I made a mental note to check if Richard had remembered to water my prized hydrangeas. I slid my key into the lock and turned it. Nothing happened. The key wouldn't rotate. Frowning, I tried again, jiggling it slightly as the old lock sometimes needed. Still nothing. "That's strange," I muttered to myself. Perhaps I was using the wrong key? I checked my keyring, but no, this was definitely the right one, the brass key with the small nick on the side that I'd used for years. I tried the back door next, walking around the wraparound porch to the kitchen entrance. The key didn't work there either. A cold feeling began to spread in my chest as I tried the side door leading to the garage. Same result. I was locked out of my own home. I rang the doorbell, thinking that perhaps Richard was home after all and had simply parked his car in the garage. No answer. I knocked loudly, then peered through the windows. The house looked undisturbed but empty. With growing alarm, I called Richard's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. I texted him, "I'm home but my keys don't work. Are you nearby?" 30 minutes later, as I sat on the porch steps growing increasingly frustrated, Richard's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out looking surprised to see me. "Mom, you're back early." "No, Richard, I'm right on time," I replied, standing up. "My key doesn't work in any of the doors. What's going on?" A strange expression crossed his face, something between guilt and defiance. "Oh right. I meant to tell you. I had the locks changed." The statement hung in the air between us, so outrageous that for a moment I thought I'd misheard him. "You did what?" My voice was quiet but sharp. "I had the locks changed," he repeated, pulling out a new key and moving past me to unlock the front door. "There was an attempted break-in at the Henderson house down the street last week. I was worried about security." The explanation might have sounded reasonable if not for the fact that he hadn't bothered to inform me or provide me with a new key before my return. "And you didn't think I might need a key to my own house?" I asked, following him inside. "I was going to give you one when you got back," he shrugged, tossing his keys on the hallway table, "which I thought would be later tonight." I stood in the foyer of my own home feeling like an intruder. Something wasn't right. The attempted break-in story could be verified, but Richard's casualness about locking me out of my own house sent warning signals through my mind. Richard, this is my house. You can't change the locks without telling me. Actually, Mom, he said, his tone shifting to something condescending that I'd never heard from him before. I've been thinking we need to talk about the house situation. What house situation? I asked, though a sinking feeling told me I wasn't going to like what came next. You're getting older, he began in a tone one might use with a child. This place is too big for you to manage alone. The stairs are getting dangerous for someone your age. I'm just trying to protect what will eventually be my inheritance anyway. I felt as though he'd slapped me. I'm 68, Richard, not 98. I'm perfectly capable of managing my own home, as I've done for decades. Come on, Mom, he said, rolling his eyes. You nearly fell on the stairs last month, and you keep forgetting to lock the doors at night. I'm just looking out for you. And for my investment. My investment. The words chilled me. The house had never been discussed as his investment. It was my home, purchased with my hard-earned money, maintained with my care over decades. I think you should stay with Barbara tonight, Richard continued, checking his watch. I have some friends coming over, and we need to talk about the house situation tomorrow when we're both calm. Friends coming over? To my house? I was struggling to process the rapid shifting of power happening before my eyes. It's poker night, he said dismissively. We'll be in the basement. You wouldn't like it anyway. Too loud for you. I stood my ground. I'm not leaving my own home, Richard. His expression hardened. Mom, I've already called Barbara. She's expecting you. We'll talk tomorrow about transitioning the deed to my name, since I'm going to be taking over the house payments and maintenance from now on. The audacity left me speechless. In the span of a 3-day weekend, my son had apparently decided to appropriate my home and had taken concrete steps to force my compliance. I'd like to say I stood firm and demanded my rightful place, but the truth is, I was so shocked by the betrayal that I found myself mechanically gathering an overnight bag with fresh clothes, toothbrush, and medications. Sometimes retreat is the better part of valor, especially when you need time to formulate a strategy. As Richard practically ushered me out the door, he had the nerve to say, "This is for your own good, Mom. You'll thank me later when you don't have all this responsibility." Barbara was waiting for me when I arrived at her condominium 15 minutes later. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, pulling me into a hug. "What did he do?" Over a hastily prepared cup of chamomile tea, I recounted the surreal experience. "He's trying to steal your house," Barbara said bluntly when I finished. "You need to call the police." "I can't have my son arrested," I replied, though the thought had certainly crossed my mind. "Not yet anyway. I need to understand what's really going on here." That night, I barely slept on Barbara's guest bed. Around midnight, my phone rang. It was Richard. "I think we got off on the wrong foot earlier," he began, his voice overly conciliatory. "I just want what's best for you." "By locking me out of my own home?" I asked. "That was poorly handled," he admitted. "But Mom, I've been watching you struggle with this big house. The property taxes are eating up your retirement savings. The maintenance is becoming too much. Wouldn't you be happier in a nice senior living community?" "Richard, I'm financially secure and physically capable. The house is paid off, and I manage the property taxes just fine." My patience was wearing thin. "What's really going on?" There was a pause on the line. "I'm trying to help you transition gracefully into the next phase of your life," he said finally. "If you want to come back home, we need some ground rules. I think it would be best if you sign the house over to me, and I'll guarantee you can live there as long as you want." The sheer audacity of his offer left me momentarily speechless. "Mom, you always said the house would be mine someday anyway," he pressed on. "This just makes it official and protects both of us." "Protects us from what exactly?" I asked. "From you making irrational decisions as you get older," he said, the condescension dripping from every word. "From estate taxes. From potential care costs if your health declines." Each justification was more transparent than the last. My son, who had contributed nothing to the house's purchase or upkeep, who had moved in temporarily and overstayed his welcome, was now attempting to manipulate me into signing over my most valuable asset. "We'll talk tomorrow," I said finally, unwilling to continue the conversation when I was too angry to think clearly. "Good night, Richard." As I hung up, I noticed my hands were shaking not from fear, but from a slow-building rage I hadn't felt in years. Richard had severely underestimated me if he thought I would roll over and let him take everything I'd worked for. He seemed to have forgotten who I was, not just his mother, but Eleanor Wilson, who had fought her way up in a male-dominated legal profession when the odds were stacked against her, who had gone toe-to-toe with some of Boston's shrewdest real estate developers and won. He had changed the locks, thinking that would keep me out and force my compliance. But locks were just the beginning of what could be changed. And unlike Richard, I understood exactly how property law worked. The next morning I called Grace Chan, my former colleague and one of the few people I still trusted from my law firm days. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, away from anywhere Richard might run into us. Grace hadn't changed much in the 10 years since her retirement, still impeccably dressed in a tailored pantsuit, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob that framed her keen eyes. She'd been a formidable presence in the courtroom, and retirement hadn't dulled her edge. "Eleanor," she said, embracing me warmly before we sat down. "It's been too long. Though I wish it were under better circumstances." I filled her in on the situation as our coffee arrived. Grace's expression darkened with each new detail. "So let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "Your son changed the locks while you were away, has essentially barred you from your own home, and is now demanding you sign over the deed to him?" "That sums it up," I confirmed. "You should call the police," Grace said, echoing Barbara's sentiment from the night before. "This is elder abuse, plain and simple." I shook my head. "I want to handle this privately if I can. Richard is still my son, and I'd rather not have him arrested if there's another way." Grace gave me a look I recognized from our days arguing cases together. The one that said she thought I was being too soft but would respect my decision for now. "At minimum, you need to understand what you're dealing with," she said. "Richard's behavior is too extreme for this to be just about protecting you or securing his inheritance. There's something else going on." She was right, of course. Richard had always been self-centered, but this level of manipulation and planning wasn't typical. There had to be more to the story. "Let's start with the basics," Grace continued, slipping effortlessly into lawyer mode. "The house is solely in your name, correct? No other names on the deed." "Yes, it's only in my name," I confirmed. "Thomas and I purchased it together, but after he died, I refinanced to remove his name." "Good. And you haven't signed any documents recently that Richard might have given you? Nothing about changing ownership or power of attorney?" "Absolutely nothing," I assured her. "Then legally you're in a strong position," Grace said. "He has no right to exclude you from your property. The fact that he's your son and has been living there doesn't change that. He's essentially a tenant at will, and you can evict him if necessary." The word evict sent a pang through my heart. How had it come to this? Contemplating evicting my own child from my home? Grace must have seen the conflict on my face. "Eleanor, I know this is difficult, but Richard is an adult who is trying to take advantage of you. You need to protect yourself." We spent the next hour outlining potential legal strategies. Grace suggested filing for an emergency court order to regain access to my home, followed by formal eviction proceedings if Richard didn't cooperate. "In the meantime," she advised, "you need to figure out what Richard's real motivation is. This isn't just about having a place to stay." After leaving Grace, I did something I'd never thought I'd do. I began investigating my own son. Starting with social media. Richard had always been active online, posting about his poker tournaments and nights out with friends. I rarely checked his profiles, respecting his privacy, but now I needed information. What I found chilled me to the bone. Just 3 weeks earlier, Richard had posted in a private group about finally offloading mom's old Colonial. A mutual friend had commented, "Great location. You should get top dollar in this market." He was planning to sell my house, my home. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Further scrolling revealed hints about Richard's dire financial situation. Comments about settling debts and getting loan sharks off my back, painted a disturbing picture. My son wasn't just casually gambling with friends. He appeared to be in serious trouble with dangerous people. I needed more concrete evidence. Using a spare key Barbara had for emergencies, I returned to my house during hours I knew Richard would be at his weekly therapy appointment. One of the few consistent commitments he maintained. The home I entered felt foreign. In just a few days, Richard had rearranged the living room, moving my reading chair to make space for an enormous gaming setup. Empty beer bottles and takeout containers littered the coffee table. But I wasn't there to critique his housekeeping. I headed straight for the home office, where I kept important documents in a filing cabinet. The cabinet had been ransacked, folders pulled out and papers disturbed. My heart raced as I checked the secret compartment behind my desk, where I kept my most important documents. The deed to the house was still there, thankfully. But as I examined it closely, I noticed something troubling: slight indentations on the paper, as if someone had traced over my signature while the document rested on top of it. Richard had been practicing my signature. Moving methodically through the house, I documented everything with my phone camera. The changed locks, the disturbed files, the state of each room. In my bedroom, I discovered several valuable pieces of jewelry missing, including my mother's pearl necklace and the diamond earrings Thomas had given me on our 20th anniversary. The final confirmation came when I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. As I was finishing my inspection, the front door opened. I quickly ducked into the guest bathroom, leaving the door cracked open. Richard had returned early with a woman I recognized as Jessica, his girlfriend of 3 months. "The real estate agent is coming tomorrow," Richard was saying. "Once Mom signs the transfer paperwork, we can list it immediately." "And you're sure she'll sign?" Jessica asked, sounding skeptical. "She doesn't have a choice," Richard replied confidently. "I've got her locked out, and I've convinced Barbara that Mom's getting forgetful and needs supervision. If she fights me on this, I'll petition for guardianship." No judge would side with an elderly woman who can't even remember to lock her doors at night. My blood ran cold at the calculated cruelty of his plan. He was going to claim I was incompetent if I didn't comply with his demands. "What about all her stuff?" Jessica asked. "We'll move the valuable antiques to storage to sell later," Richard said dismissively. "The rest goes to Goodwill or the dump. She won't need much in assisted living anyway." I had heard enough. Silently, I slipped out the back door while they were distracted in the kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start my car, but not from fear this time, from a cold, clear anger unlike anything I'd felt before. Richard wasn't just trying to take my house. He was attempting to erase my entire life and autonomy. He was willing to declare his own mother incompetent to satisfy gambling debts and fund his lifestyle. As I drove to Barbara's condo, my mind was already formulating a plan. Richard had forgotten one crucial fact. He wasn't dealing with a helpless elderly woman. He was up against a retired real estate attorney who had spent 4 decades mastering property law. He had changed the locks on my house. Now I would change something far more fundamental. The next morning, I arrived at the offices of Goodwin and Hayes, the law firm where I had spent most of my career. Though I had been retired for nearly 3 years, the receptionist recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Wilson." What a lovely surprise. "Hello, Denise," I smiled. "Is Timothy available?" "I don't have an appointment, but it's rather urgent." Timothy Hayes had been my paralegal for 15 years before becoming a partner after passing the bar. He owed his career to my mentorship, a fact we both acknowledged without it ever needing to be explicitly stated. "For you?" "Always," Denise said, picking up the phone. "Let me tell him you're here." Minutes later, Timothy was ushering me into his corner office with its view of Boston Harbor. At 52, his dark hair was now streaked with silver, but his boundless energy remained unchanged. "Eleanor," he exclaimed, giving me a warm hug. "This is an unexpected pleasure. What brings you back to these hallowed halls?" I took a deep breath. "I need your help, Timothy. And I need absolute discretion." His expression turned serious as he gestured for me to take a seat. "Of course. What's going on?" I laid out the situation methodically, as if presenting a case: Richard's return home, the changed locks, the discovered plans to sell my house, the threats to declare me incompetent if I didn't comply. Timothy's face darkened with each new detail. "This is outrageous," he said when I finished. "We should call the police immediately." "That's not what I want," I replied firmly. "At least not yet. Richard is still my son, and this situation is partly my own fault. I've enabled his behavior for years, never holding him fully accountable. But I won't let him take my home or my dignity." Timothy nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to transfer the deed of my house to a living trust," I said, "with me as the trustee and beneficiary during my lifetime." A small smile played at the corners of Timothy's mouth as understanding dawned, effectively removing Richard's ability to pressure you into signing it over to him directly. "Exactly," I confirmed. "And I want to add an irrevocability clause specifically regarding any attempt to transfer the property to Richard Wilson." Timothy leaned back in his chair, impressed. "You haven't lost your touch, Eleanor. A living trust would protect the property from any guardianship proceedings Richard might attempt as well. If he somehow managed to have you declared incompetent, which is highly unlikely given your obvious mental acuity, the house would already be secured in the trust." "Precisely," I nodded. "I also want to formally document Richard's tenancy and begin eviction proceedings." Timothy winced slightly at this. "That's going to permanently damage your relationship with him." "Our relationship is already damaged," I said quietly. "This isn't about punishment. It's about consequences. Richard needs to understand that his actions have real repercussions." For the next 3 hours, Timothy and I worked through the legal details. We drafted the trust documents, prepared an eviction notice, and documented everything I had discovered about Richard's plans. Timothy also suggested we prepare a cease and desist letter regarding any attempts to sell property that didn't belong to him. "What about your access to the house in the meantime?" Timothy asked as we finalized the paperwork. "You can't just wait until the eviction goes through." "I've arranged for a locksmith to meet me there tomorrow," I explained. "With a copy of the deed as proof of ownership, they'll change the locks back. Richard will be out at a job interview I helped arrange through an old client. Probably the only appointment he wouldn't dare miss." Timothy looked impressed. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," I admitted. "I'm still struggling with the emotional side of this. He's my son, Timothy. My only child." Timothy's expression softened. "Eleanor, you're doing what needs to be done. Richard has forced this situation, not you. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone we love is to stop them from making terrible mistakes." As I signed the final documents creating the Eleanor Wilson Living Trust, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and resolution. This wasn't how I had imagined spending my retirement years, legally outmaneuvering my own child. But Richard had left me no choice. "There's one more thing," I said as Timothy prepared to file the trust documents. "I want to add a conditional clause to my will." "What kind of condition?" Timothy asked. "I want to specify that Richard can only inherit the house after my death if he completes a financial management course and maintains 1 year of documented sobriety from gambling." Timothy nodded approvingly. "Setting boundaries while still leaving the door open for redemption. That's very you, Eleanor." As I left the law offices with copies of all the necessary documents, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time since discovering the changed locks, I wasn't just reacting to Richard's schemes. I was taking control of the situation. The next day went exactly as planned. While Richard was at his job interview, I met the locksmith at my house. With my deed and identification in hand, having the locks changed back was a simple matter. I also took the opportunity to have security cameras installed discreetly around the property, both for evidence gathering and my own protection. Once inside, I methodically photographed everything. The state of each room, the missing valuables, the disturbed papers. I placed the most important documents and remaining valuables in a safe deposit box at my bank, not willing to risk them remaining in the house. Then I waited in my favorite reading chair for Richard to return home. His key wouldn't work, of course. When he rang the doorbell, I took my time answering it. The shock on his face when he saw me was almost worth everything I'd been through. "Mom? How did you get in?" he stammered. "It's my house, Richard," I replied calmly. "I had the locks changed back." His expression cycled rapidly through surprise, anger, and calculation. "We need to talk about this, Mom. You're not thinking clearly." "On the contrary," I said, stepping aside to let him enter. "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Please come in. We do indeed need to talk." As Richard stepped into the foyer, his eyes darted around, likely looking for evidence of what I might have discovered during my absence. I led him to the dining room table where I had arranged several documents, a copy of the new trust paperwork, with the original safely at Timothy's office, the eviction notice, and printouts of his social media posts about selling my house. "What's all this?" he asked, though his pallor suggested he already knew. "This is the consequence of your actions," I said quietly. "I know everything, Richard. The gambling debts, the plans to sell my house, the practice attempts at forging my signature. Even the threat to have me declared incompetent if I didn't cooperate." He started to speak, but I held up my hand. "No more lies. No more manipulation. I've transferred the house to a living trust that specifically prevents it from being transferred to you under any circumstances during my lifetime. You have 30 days to find another place to live, as outlined in this eviction notice." Richard's face flushed with anger. "You can't do this to me. I'm your son." "Yes, you are my son," I agreed, keeping my voice level. "Which is why I didn't immediately call the police when I discovered you were planning to defraud me. It's why I'm giving you 30 days instead of having you removed immediately, which would be my legal right." "Mom, you don't understand," he began, his tone shifting to the manipulative wheedling I'd grown too familiar with. "I have debts. Dangerous people are after me. I need it." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You needed money, so you decided to steal my home rather than ask for help or face the consequences of your actions. That stops now." For a moment I saw a flicker of the little boy who used to come to me with scraped knees and broken toys, looking for me to fix everything. But that little boy had grown into a man who needed to face reality. "I've also added a condition to my will," I continued. "You can still inherit this house after I'm gone, but only if you complete a financial management course and maintain 1 year of documented sobriety from gambling." "You're bribing me to get treatment?" he asked incredulously. "No, I'm establishing consequences and boundaries," I corrected him. "Something I should have done long ago. What you do with this opportunity is entirely up to you." Richard stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I knew this wasn't the end of the confrontation, merely the beginning of a difficult new chapter in our relationship. But for the first time in months, I slept in my own bed in my own home, secure in the knowledge that I had protected myself while still leaving a path for reconciliation, if Richard chose to take it. 3 days passed in tense silence. Richard returned to the house late each night and left early each morning, avoiding any interaction with me. I could hear him moving about in his room, occasionally talking on the phone in hushed, urgent tones. Though the avoidance was childish, it gave me time to regain my footing in my own home. On the 4th day, everything came to a head. I was tending to my garden when an unfamiliar car pulled into my driveway around noon. A well-dressed couple emerged, followed by a woman in a smart business suit carrying a portfolio. Richard appeared seemingly out of nowhere to greet them, his charm turned up to full wattage. "Mr. and Mrs. Donovan. Right on time. And Stephanie, always a pleasure," he called out, completely ignoring my presence among the hydrangeas. With dawning comprehension, I realized these must be the potential buyers he'd mentioned to Jessica. And Stephanie was likely the real estate agent. Despite everything, the eviction notice, our confrontation, the trust paperwork, Richard was still attempting to sell my house. I straightened up, brushed the soil from my gardening gloves, and approached the group. "Good afternoon," I said pleasantly. "I'm Eleanor Wilson, the owner of this property. May I ask why you're here?" The couple looked confused, glancing between Richard and me. The real estate agent recovered first. "Stephanie Morgan, Boston Elite Properties," she said, extending her hand. "I believe there must be some confusion. We have an appointment with Richard Wilson to view the house. He's selling the property." "Is that so?" I replied, not taking her offered hand. "Richard, would you care to explain why you're showing my house to strangers when you have no legal right to sell it?" Richard's face flushed crimson. Mom, we talked about this. You agreed. I most certainly did not, I interrupted firmly. Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, M.S. Morgan, I apologize for the misunderstanding, but this house is not for sale. Richard has no authority to show it or sell it, as he is merely a tenant, and one who is currently being evicted, I might add. The couple looked mortified. The real estate agent's professional smile faltered. Perhaps we should reschedule when the ownership situation is clearer, she suggested diplomatically. There's nothing to reschedule, I stated firmly. The house is held in the Eleanor Wilson Living Trust and is not on the market. If Richard told you otherwise, he was deliberately misrepresenting the facts. Richard's charm evaporated like morning dew. Mom, you're embarrassing yourself, he hissed. We can discuss this inside. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. Then, turning to the confused visitors, I suggest you ask Mr. Wilson for documentation proving his right to sell this property. He won't be able to provide it because it doesn't exist. The real estate agent's expression hardened as she turned to Richard. Mr. Wilson, is this true? Do you have the deed or power of attorney? Richard's silence was answer enough. I'll need to see proof of ownership before proceeding, she said firmly. We don't list properties without proper documentation. I can get it, Richard insisted desperately. There's just been a misunderstanding with my mother. She's getting older and sometimes gets confused about financial matters. That was the final straw. Ms. Morgan, I'm a retired real estate attorney who practiced law in Boston for 40 years. I assure you I'm not confused about who owns my property. If you'd like verification, you can contact Timothy Hayes at Goodwin & Hayes, who manages my trust. At the mention of one of Boston's most prestigious law firms, the real estate agent took a definitive step back. I think we're done here. Mr. and Mrs. Donovan, I apologize for wasting your time. As the disappointed couple and the now frosty real estate agent retreated to their cars, Richard's facade completely crumbled. Do you have any idea what you've done? He shouted once they were out of earshot. I needed that sale. Those people were ready to make an offer. On property you don't own, I reminded him calmly, though my heart was racing. You've been lying to them, just as you've been lying to me. I have debts, Mom. Serious debts to people you don't want to mess with. Then you should have asked for help, not attempted to steal my home, I replied. Our confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of another car. This one I recognized as Jessica's compact sedan. She emerged looking confused by the tension she was walking into. Richard? What's going on? I thought you were showing the house today. The showing's been cancelled, I informed her before Richard could respond. Permanently. The house isn't for sale. Jessica looked between us, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding. You told me your mother had agreed to this, she said to Richard accusingly. She was going to, Richard insisted. She's just being difficult now. Difficult? I echoed incredulously. Is that what you call refusing to let you sell my home out from under me? Jessica's eyes widened. You said this was a mutual decision, she said to Richard. You said your mom wanted to downsize and you were helping her. That's what I've been trying to get her to understand, Richard exclaimed. She needs to downsize. This place is too much for her. Stop it, Richard, Jessica said quietly. Just stop. I can see what's happening here. She turned to me. Mrs. Wilson, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was doing this without your consent. Her sincerity caught me off guard. Thank you, Jessica. You're taking her side? Richard demanded incredulously. There shouldn't be sides, Jessica replied. She's your mother, and this is her house. She shook her head sadly. This isn't the man I thought I was dating. First the gambling debts you hid from me, now this. Jessica, wait. Richard started, but she was already walking back to her car. Don't call me Richard, she said over her shoulder. I'm not interested in being with someone who would treat his own mother this way. As Jessica drove away, Richard rounded on me with naked fury. Are you happy now? You've ruined everything. I didn't ruin anything, Richard, I said quietly. Your choices did that. His face contorted with rage. You sanctimonious old. He caught himself before finishing the insult, but the damage was done. The veil had been completely lifted, revealing the extent of his contempt. "I want you out of my house," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. "Not in 30 days. Now. You can't do that without a court order," he sneered. As if on cue, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. I had asked Timothy to arrange for an officer to deliver the formal eviction notice, anticipating that Richard might become difficult once his plans were thwarted. "Mrs. Wilson?" the officer called as he approached. "I'm Officer Martinez. I'm here about the eviction notice." Richard's face drained of color. "You called the cops on me?" "Your own son." "I called a legal representative to serve an eviction notice," I corrected him. "Given your behavior, it seemed prudent to have official witnesses." What followed was both heartbreaking and necessary. Officer Martinez confirmed my identity and ownership of the property, then formally served Richard with the eviction notice. When Richard became belligerent, a second officer was called. They supervised as Richard packed a suitcase of essential belongings, informing him that he could arrange to collect the rest of his possessions within the week, with proper supervision. "This isn't over," Richard threatened as the officers escorted him to his car. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've done." I watched from the porch as my only child drove away, spitting gravel from under his tires in a final display of defiance. The pain was almost physical, a hollowness expanding in my chest where maternal pride and love had once resided. Officer Martinez approached me with surprising gentleness. "Ma'am, would you like us to stay a while? Or call someone to be with you?" I shook my head. "No, thank you. I'll be fine." But as I closed the door behind me and faced the empty house, truly mine again, yet somehow more hollow than before, I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I called Barbara, who arrived within 20 minutes with a bottle of wine and a fierce protective energy. "I should have seen this coming," she said as we sat in my living room. "The signs were all there." "We both missed them," I admitted. "Or maybe we saw but didn't want to believe." We sat in companionable silence for a while, sipping wine and processing the day's events. "What will you do now?" Barbara finally asked. "Heal," I said simply, "and hope that Richard eventually does the same." As the evening shadows lengthened across my living room floor, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Grief for the relationship that seemed irreparably damaged, relief at having reclaimed my home and autonomy, and a quiet resolve to move forward with the wisdom this painful experience had granted me. Richard had changed the locks on my house, thinking it would force my compliance. Instead, it had awakened the fighter in me. The woman who had built a career on protecting people's property rights, who had raised a child alone while breaking glass ceilings in her profession. I had changed the deed, yes. But more importantly, I had changed the power dynamic that had allowed Richard to believe he could take what wasn't his without consequences. Whether our relationship could ever heal remained to be seen. But I had protected myself while still leaving the door open for reconciliation, if Richard chose to walk through it. The week after Richard's eviction was eerily quiet. The house, now empty of his boisterous presence and constant comings and goings, seemed to exhale in relief. Or perhaps that was just me, finally able to move through my own home without the constant tension of anticipating conflict. Barbara and Marilyn took turns staying with me, despite my protestations that I was perfectly fine on my own. Their company was a comfort I hadn't realized I needed until I found myself laughing over dinner for the first time in months. "Have you heard from him?" Marilyn asked on the third evening, as we cleared away the dishes from a simple but satisfying meal. "Not directly," I admitted. "He's been texting Barbara, trying to get her to intervene." Barbara snorted, as if I would help him after what he tried to pull. "He keeps insisting his mother has lost her mind and needs help. I told him the only person who needs help is him." I smiled faintly at her fierce loyalty, but the situation wasn't that simple. "He does need help, Barbara. That's part of the tragedy here. The gambling, the desperate measures. These aren't the actions of someone in a healthy place. That doesn't excuse what he tried to do to you," Marilyn pointed out. "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "But understanding and excusing are different things." On day 5, Timothy called with an update. "Eleanor, We've received a rather concerning communication from an attorney claiming to represent Richard. My heart sank. What kind of communication? He's threatening to contest the trust and file for guardianship over you, claiming you're mentally incompetent and being manipulated by your friends. Timothy's tone was carefully neutral, but I could hear the underlying indignation. It's a baseless claim, of course. We have extensive documentation of your mental acuity, including your recent work on the trust documents themselves. He's really going through with it, I murmured, more to myself than to Timothy. Even after everything, some part of me had hoped Richard would come to his senses. It's likely a bluff, Timothy assured me. A desperate attempt to pressure you. No ethical attorney would pursue this case once they see the facts. And if it's not a bluff? Then we'll handle it, Timothy said confidently. You have the law and the facts on your side, Eleanor. Not to mention an entire legal community that respects you enormously. After hanging up, I wandered through the house, trailing my fingers along familiar surfaces. The polished banister, the bookshelf Thomas had built, the mantelpiece with its collection of family photos. I paused at a picture of Richard at his college graduation, his smile wide and genuine as he stood between Thomas and me, full of promise and possibility. Where had that young man gone? When had he become someone capable of such calculated betrayal? The doorbell rang, interrupting my reverie. Through the peephole, I was surprised to see Jessica standing on my porch, looking nervous. Jessica, I said as I opened the door. This is unexpected. I'm sorry to drop by unannounced, Mrs. Wilson, she said. I've been wrestling with whether to come, but I thought you should know some things about Richard's situation. I invited her in, offering tea which she accepted gratefully. As we sat in the kitchen, neutral territory somehow, she shared what she knew. Richard owes money to some dangerous people, she began. Not just casinos or banks, but loan sharks. He started borrowing after losing his job last year. Something he hid from you. He lost his job. This was news to me. Richard had mentioned reduced hours, but never a complete termination. Jessica nodded. 8 months ago. He kept pretending to go to work, but he was actually going to casinos, trying to win enough to cover his mounting debts. The timeline aligned with his increasing desperation to move in with me. It hadn't just been the divorce that had left him needing a place to stay. He'd been financially underwater. How much does he owe? I asked, not entirely sure I wanted to know. Jessica hesitated. Last I knew, around $80,000. The figure staggered me. How could he accumulate so much debt so quickly? High-interest loans to pay other loans, she explained. And he kept believing the next big win would solve everything. Classic gambler's fallacy. And the house? I prompted. Was that just about money, or was there more to it? Jessica looked uncomfortable. He told different stories to different people. To me, he said you wanted to downsize and he was helping you transition. To his gambling friends, he bragged about how he was going to flip the property for a huge profit. I think he believed whatever story was convenient in the moment. Her insight was painful but illuminating. Richard had always been able to compartmentalize and justify his actions, even as a child. This was the same pattern, amplified by desperation and addiction. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. You and Richard aren't together anymore. Because I liked you, she said simply. The few times we met, you were kind to me. And because I have a mother too. I wouldn't want anyone doing to her what Richard tried to do to you. After Jessica left, I sat for a long time at my kitchen table, absorbing what I'd learned. The scope of Richard's deception was greater than I'd imagined, but so was his desperation. This wasn't just about greed or entitlement, though those elements were certainly present. It was about a drowning man grasping at anything that might keep him afloat, even if it meant pulling someone else under. Understanding didn't excuse his actions, but it did help me contextualize them, and it helped me make a difficult decision. The next day, I met with Timothy again, this time with a different purpose. I want to press charges for the stolen jewelry and forged documents, I told him. And I want to report the gambling debts to the proper authorities. Timothy looked surprised. That's a significant escalation, Eleanor. Are you sure? I'm not doing this out of vengeance, I explained. Richard needs intervention, And he's not going to seek it voluntarily. The criminal justice system isn't perfect, but it might connect him with resources I can't provide: addiction counseling, financial management programs. It could also result in jail time, Timothy pointed out gently. I know, I acknowledged, the words heavy in my mouth. But continuing as we are isn't helping him. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone we love is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their actions. The process of filing police reports and providing evidence was emotionally exhausting. Each stolen item I listed, each forged document I identified felt like a betrayal I was forced to relive. But beneath the pain was a growing certainty that I was finally taking the right action. Not just for myself, but for Richard too. 3 weeks after the eviction, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. Mom. Richard's voice was subdued, lacking its usual bluster. I've been arrested. I know, I said quietly. I filed the reports. There was a long silence on the line. You reported me? Your own son? Yes, Richard. I did. Another pause. Why? Because you need help that I can't give you, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. And because actions have consequences, even when they're committed by someone I love. So this is tough love? His tone was bitter but lacked its earlier venom. This is real love, I corrected. Not enabling, not rescuing, not pretending. Just truth, however painful. Richard was silent for so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, he spoke again, his voice smaller than I'd heard it since he was a child. What happens now? That depends on you. I told him honestly. There's a path forward, but you have to be willing to walk it. Treatment for the gambling. Restitution for what you've taken. Rebuilding trust, which will take time. And if I do all that, will you drop the charges? No, I said firmly. The legal process will continue. But I'll be there for your recovery if you genuinely commit to it. The trust stipulation still stands. Complete treatment and maintain sobriety, and the house will eventually be yours after I'm gone. You're a hard woman, Eleanor Wilson, he said, using my full name the way he did when he was younger, and trying to create distance between us. I'm a woman who finally learned that loving someone doesn't mean giving them whatever they want, I replied. It's taken me 68 years and nearly losing my home to learn that lesson. I hope it doesn't take you as long. After we hung up, I walked through each room of my house. Truly mine again. Touching familiar objects, straightening pictures, reclaiming spaces. The house felt different now, marked by what had transpired within its walls. But it was still home, still the place where I had built a life and raised a child and weathered losses and celebrated triumphs. Richard had changed the locks, thinking it would keep me out and force my compliance. I had changed the deed, securing my legal ownership. But the most important changes couldn't be seen or documented. They were the internal shifts in both of us, the painful but necessary recalibration of our relationship. Whether those changes would ultimately heal or further fracture our bond remained to be seen. But for the first time in longer than I cared to admit, I was prioritizing truth over comfort, reality over wishful thinking. And in that clear-eyed awareness, I found a bittersweet peace. 6 months passed, bringing the crisp chill of autumn to Boston once again. My garden had moved through its seasons, the riotous blooms of summer giving way to the more subdued colors of fall. I found myself spending more time among the plants now, finding solace in their predictable cycles of growth, dormancy, and renewal. The house had undergone its own transformation. With help from Barbara and Marilyn, I'd rearranged furniture, repainted several rooms, and replaced the items Richard had taken with new pieces that better reflected my current tastes. It was still the same colonial home filled with memories, but it felt refreshed, unburdened. Richard was serving a 6-month sentence in a minimum security facility, with provisions for attending a gambling addiction program. We spoke weekly by phone brief, sometimes awkward conversations that nevertheless represented more honest communication than we'd had in years. The program leader says I need to make amends, he told me during one call in late September. Not just apologies, but actual amends. What do you think that means? I asked, curious about his interpretation. He was quiet for a moment. I think it means understanding the harm I've caused and trying to repair it, Not just saying I'm sorry and expecting everything to go back to normal. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it felt like the first green shoot emerging after a long winter. A sign of potential growth, though not yet a guarantee. My own healing took different forms. At Timothy's suggestion, I began volunteering at a legal clinic specifically serving elderly residents facing housing issues. Twice a week, I sat with women and men, many around my age or older, who were navigating predatory loans, family disputes over property, or misleading reverse mortgage arrangements. You have rights, I would tell them, the phrase becoming something of a personal mantra. Your age doesn't diminish them, and your family ties don't override them. Many of their stories echoed elements of my own experience. Adult children who viewed their parents' assets as pre-inheritance, who used emotional manipulation or exploitation to gain control of property, who justified their actions as protection, while serving their own interests. How did you know to fight back? Asked Doris, a 74-year-old widow whose daughter and son-in-law had pressured her to sign over her brownstone. I keep second-guessing myself, wondering if they're right about me not being able to manage on my own. I almost didn't, I admitted. It's hard to stand up to the people we love, especially when they use our relationship as leverage. But I remembered who I was before I was a mother. A woman who fought her way through a male-dominated profession, who built a career on protecting people's rights to their property. I was a mathematics teacher for 30 years, Doris said, straightening her posture slightly. I balanced my own books and managed my own investments, even when my husband was alive. Then you have your answer, I smiled. Being older doesn't mean being incapable. These conversations were healing in their own way, transforming my painful experience into something that could help others. Each time I guided someone toward resources or helped them understand their legal options, I felt a little more of my professional confidence returning. The part of my identity that had been temporarily eclipsed by the trauma of Richard's betrayal. At home, I implemented practical changes too. New security cameras monitored the property, sending alerts to my phone if anyone approached when I wasn't there. A state-of-the-art alarm system replaced the simple deadbolts that had failed to protect my home before. Timothy helped me establish additional legal protections, powers of attorney, for both healthcare and finances that name trusted friends, rather than family members. It's not that I think Richard will try again, I explained to Barbara when she questioned the extent of my precautions. It's that I never want to feel that vulnerable again. She nodded, understanding. It's like wearing a seatbelt. You don't expect to crash, but you're prepared if you do. Richard was released in early November, moving into a halfway house in another state where he'd found a job opportunity through a recovery program connection. Our relationship remained tentative, defined by careful boundaries on both sides. I didn't offer financial support, and to his credit, he didn't ask for it. I'm starting over, he told me during our first in-person meeting since his release, a lunch at a neutral restaurant halfway between our locations. From scratch. That takes courage, I acknowledged and meant it. I'm sorry, he said, the words hanging between us like fragile glass ornaments. Not just for what I did, but for who I became. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know. Thank you, I replied simply. Forgiveness might come with time, but it couldn't be rushed or forced. As winter settled over New England, bringing short days and long nights, I found myself reflecting often on the journey of the past year. There had been moments when the pain seemed too great to bear. Seeing the contempt in my son's eyes as he tried to take my home, realizing the extent of his deception, making the agonizing decision to press charges. But there had been moments of unexpected grace too: Jessica's honesty, Barbara and Marilyn's unwavering support, the community of elders I'd found through my volunteer work, and even the small signs of change in Richard himself. I thought often of a conversation I'd had with one of the counselors at the elder legal clinic where I volunteered. What I've learned, I told her, is that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. For too long, I equated being a good mother with endless giving, even at my own expense. That's common, she nodded, especially for women of your generation. You were taught that self-sacrifice was the highest form of love. But it isn't, I said, the realization still fresh enough to surprise me. Love without boundaries isn't really love at all. It's enablement, codependency, fear. "And what does real love look like to you now?" she asked. I considered this carefully. Honesty, respect for both yourself and the other person, wanting what's truly best for them, even when that's difficult, and recognizing that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop someone from causing harm to themselves or others. On a snowy evening in December, I sat by my fireplace with a photo album open on my lap. It was filled with pictures spanning decades. Richard's childhood, my career milestones, our family vacations, the house at different stages. Looking at these frozen moments of happier times didn't fill me with the same acute grief it once had. Instead, I felt a gentle acceptance of the complex, imperfect journey we'd shared. My phone chimed with a text from Richard. 6 months sober today. 1 day at a time. I texted back. Proud of you. Keep going. Brief, simple words that couldn't possibly capture the complicated emotions behind them. But they were true, and truth was what we were both learning to prioritize now. Richard had changed the locks on my house, a literal and symbolic attempt to shut me out of my own life. I had changed the deed, protecting what was mine while still leaving a path for his future inheritance if he did the necessary work of recovery. But the most profound changes weren't in locks or legal documents. They were in our understanding of ourselves and each other, in the painful but necessary recognition that love without accountability isn't really love at all. I closed the photo album and placed it carefully on the shelf, alongside newer books about setting boundaries and understanding addiction. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, but I would walk it with open eyes, protecting myself while remaining open to the possibility of healing. Sometimes the most important lessons come to us late in life, when we have enough wisdom to recognize their value. At 68, I had finally learned that standing up for myself wasn't selfish, it was essential. That my worth wasn't diminished by age. That I could love my son while still holding him accountable for his actions. These weren't easy lessons, but they were necessary ones. And in sharing them through my volunteer work, through conversations with friends facing similar challenges, and now through this story, I hope they might help others find the courage to protect themselves when necessary, to recognize manipulation masked as concern, and to remember that it's never too late to reclaim your power. If there's one thing I want you to take from my experience, it's this. You have the right to protect what's yours, regardless of your age or family ties. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And remember that true love for others and for yourself includes both compassion and boundaries. Have you ever had to stand up to someone close to you who was trying to take advantage? Or have you struggled with setting boundaries with family members? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story helped you in any way, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth and your rights don't diminish with age.